Hello, dear friends. You are again welcomed by the Club of Seekers of Reliable Knowledge from St. Petersburg. Let's get along our world together and make it brighter and more joyful. Rate our video, subscribe to the channel, ask questions, give a thumbs up or down. Today we have Sergei Ivanovich Sukhanov, a writer, as a Russian cosmism, a thinker, a philosopher, as a guest. Today instincts, love and justice are in the divine world. Please, Sergei Ivanovich.
Good afternoon. Yes, today is the final lecture dedicated to the divine world and the issues that we have considered in great detail in the previous lectures. So, love, justice, natural selection in the divine world. Here's a little bit about myself, just in case, for those who want to get acquainted in more detail. My channels are shown here, including the working channel. Here, and so to speak, there is an email on which you can write. Let's start with the fact that according to statistics, there are two main such antagonistic models in the world. One model is a model with God, with a subtle world, a subtle plan. This is a model that believers perceive as some such basic one. And there is one model, atheistic. So, it means that there are people with an atheistic model of the world. There are actually a lot of them, but not so many. Because they are somewhere around 15% of the population. According to these statistics, a little more than 1 billion can be seen. In other words, the vast majority of the population of the planet Earth are believers. What do they believe in? Who believes in God? Who believes in Allah? Who believes in something else there? Someone believes in nirvana, but not the essence. They believe in some other world that we can't see, that we can't touch, that we can't test experimentally. But they believe it. Why? Because, first of all, they were brought up like this. Some have come to this as a result of the long evolution of their own consciousness. Here. But it doesn't matter. The fact is that if you talk to atheists, and I don't want to say that atheists are bad people, there are a lot of very good people among atheists who bring a lot of benefits to humanity. Well, they chose this model, they are so comfortable and convenient. But if you talk to them about this topic, why, let's say, they don't believe, they say, well, how to prove it? Here. There is no proof. I say, there is no proof. Well, why do you, let's say, believe? I say, I believe, because I have come to this through my own evolution. I grew up in the Soviet Union. I was raised as an atheist. My first scientific work, in quotes, was a letter from my grandmother, which I wrote somewhere when I learned to write in the second grade, or in the third. The first thing I wrote when I learned to write, I wrote a letter to my grandmother. It's a pity it didn't survive, that there is no God. And this letter was a letter of proof. I proved, poor grandmothers, so to speak, unenlightened in the village, that God does not exist. This was my first letter. Gradually, I was moving away from my atheistic upbringing. A lot of factors influenced this. In the end, since I am a scientist, I came to this conclusion, and came to the idea of the subtle world, already based on my scientific research and on some observations. I don't want to agitate anyone for a scientific, so to speak, perception of the subtle world. And I don't want to agitate anyone for anything at all. I just want to say that I am a research scientist, a systemologist, and as scientist, I just focus on those scientists I know. So, up to a certain time, all scientists were people who believed in God. Well, take, for example, ancient Greece there, not to mention the Middle Ages. And then atheists began to appear, so to speak. But I want to note that Copernicus, Galileo, Dolzana Bruno, Newton, and a number of outstanding scientists. Or you can type religious scientists in a search engine on the internet, and suddenly you will see the most famous names there. Names like the physiologist Pavlov are there, and there are a lot of people, scientists, serious scientists, who made a huge contribution. Darwin is the same to science, they were believers. That's why I joined this, so to speak, a large group of scientists, not to mention other people who just believe. And I believe that the subtle world exists. Such a long preface, some self-justification. Why am I going to build a model for a world that cannot be touched? So, well, as an example, I can say one thing, that the atheistic model is still flawed, from my point of view. Here, I will throw such a pebble into this model. Why? Because this model is a one-time person, in quotes. This is a person who came from nowhere and goes nowhere after death. He lives once, and therefore we live once. Take everything from life, there is no God, so anything that is not punishable is possible. But after death, the unknown, it scares. And here there is a beautiful slide that in fact fear is just a lack of information about how to act in a particular situation. On the subtle plane, fear is the desire to destroy what we are afraid of, namely, the change of new states and events. And therefore, a person who naturally does not believe, he is afraid of death. Any person is afraid of death. This is normal. But he tries to sort of get away from it. And he begins to wander through all sorts of hobbies, means of protection. For believers, this is faith and spiritual development. For everyone, the means of avoiding fear is love, the search for true, passionately with business, hobbies, well, even careerism. Workaholism and hoarding is also a means of distracting a person from thoughts in a timely mortal existence, even if he is an unbeliever. For people who are absolutely unbelievers, there are, well, quite such heavy drugs as gluttony, smoking, alcohol and gambling addiction, and real drugs. Why? Because, after all, it's very hard to live with the idea that you are living here temporarily, I know for myself. Therefore, I'm going to skip this here about depression, because there is a little bit of propaganda here, so to speak. I decided not to do it after all. I just want to say that, for example, in Christianity, depression is considered one of the terrible sins, the sin of despondency. Here is what is written about it in the Orthodox Encyclopedic Dictionary. Despondency is the gravest sin that leads to despair. Despondency is born where faith in God, hope in Him, and love for Him and for people fade away. Therefore, despondency is a sin of little faith, God's apostasy. I want to say that for a true Orthodox person, and for any true believer, despondency leading to depression is an unacceptable thing. The principle here is very simple. If I believe in God, then I am His son. He sent me, He made me, and I'm not happy. I am dissatisfied with my Father. I am dissatisfied with my Creator. Who am I to be unhappy? What reason do I have to be dissatisfied with the Supreme Being who created me? I put myself above Him. I believe that He did something wrong, that I am His mistake. But how dare I? You see, here even this simplest position shows that we have no right to doubt, even for a minute, that the world is reasonable. Why? Because as soon as we begin to doubt this, we automatically consider ourselves smarter than this world, smarter than its creator, smarter than God, and smarter than all other people. And as soon as we start counting it, we are immediately punished, put in a corner, and properly fucked. And they will punish us with all sorts of troubles, including despondency. I can't say that I didn't have despondency, that I didn't have depression. There were both, and the other, and the third. Like any normal person, we go through it all one way or another to get this experience. But every time I looked into it and came to the conclusion that every time the reason just lies in pride. Because when I start thinking, this is what I am, let's say, a great thinker there, what I created there, people don't appreciate me. As soon as I start walking along this path, I immediately fall into the next stage of depression. Then I start to figure out why I'm depressed. Yes, for one simple reason. Because I consider myself better than all other people, smarter than all other people, undervalued. And here you are. That's it. As soon as you consider yourself undervalued, the gates open and you fall into the hell of depression. Welcome. Therefore, this topic is huge. I just touched on it here casually. Why? Because now there are difficult times that people don't know what to do. Fear of the unknown is scary. The only source of fear is actually the unknown, uncertainty. Therefore, my whole task, strictly speaking, is to sort out at least somewhere, somehow restore order in some senses. Show these orders to people, give them some new meanings, remove the unknown, uncertainty, fill the world with great meanings. Why? Because if a person sees the highest meaning in the events taking place, he perceives them in a completely different way. Even the punishment to himself, he perceives differently. Here. Well, that's how I would make such a big preface here. And now we're going to go into the world of the topic after all. And why did I take up such a difficult topic after all? On what basis? Why? Because the topic that I'm going to consider now is topics that have been, therefore not thousands of years, but tens and hundreds of thousands of years. People have always thought about this in the higher world, imagined it to themselves, and thought about how they relate to this world. And it always tormented people. Why, who am I? The billion first person who undertook this, on the basis of what? I have one VTB foundation on which I wanted to say 2 words. The fact is that for all my long life, well, as a relatively long one, of course, I have created a new scientific worldview, in which there is a large-scale harmonious world. This is more than 40 years of painstaking, everyday research. As a result, I was able to build a new model of the universe, and give a new look at the universe of humanity. A view using the 4th scale dimension of the universe. Those who have known me for a long time do not need to tell me all this. Those who do not know can look at these books on my website. Large-Scale Harmony of the Universe, The Relay Race Civilization. The Logic of the Evolution of Mankind. I think I am the only one who knows who has explored this area of the large-scale harmonious structure of the universe. And that's why the conclusions I draw are based on the fact that they are based on a completely new model of the universe. I want to tell you right away, not a single person in the world, not even Putin Vladimir Vladimirovich, and even Trump Donald, yes, will not give you such an idea that I can give. Why? Because they don't have this model. This is a model that I have been creating for 40 years. It is not known to many people, in fact. But since I own it, I rely on it. Then everything that I will say next is based on this approach. Now we will go to the region itself. Part 1 of our conversation is just about this model and its applicability to our topic. The part is called as follows: the large-scale non-invariance of the universe, the universal hierarchy. I think that most listeners know the law of cosmic analogies of Hermes Trismegistus, which sounds like this. What is below is similar, but not equal to what is above, and what is above is similar to what is below. Well, most of them I know by myself, because for a long time I, too, remember only the first part of this phrase. What is below is like what is above. Few people pay attention to such a weight gain, but it's not equal. Similar, but not equal. Why? Well, because it's easier that way. Everything is similar, everything is fractal, or everything is not similar. That is, for the most part, people have a desire to reduce everything to some one truth, to some one idea. Already two representations are beginning to compete in consciousness, and are already causing discomfort. Here, but at least the world is binary. Therefore, there is a similarity, and there is without similarity. Here's a look at this without similarity in your own body. If you start to consider the attentive organism and move from level to level, then you see the body. There are organs inside the body, such as the liver, spleen, intestines, heart, and so on, and so on. If you go down to the scale level a little lower, you already see some structures like the brush, bones there, muscles. Even lower, you see a cellular structure, even lower, some kind of molecular structure, then an atomic structure. Those who knew physics, who remember, and when I studied it at school, have exactly the idea that these levels are completely unsuitable for each other. I call this global incomparability with the prefix without the similarity of our world. That is, there is a similarity, but there is also a similarity without it. The same applies to man, the universe, and the atomic world. You see, here on the left is a model of an atom. To the right of a person is a model of the solar system. And you see, there are balls all around. Where is the similarity here? Do you see at least one atom that looks like a man, You don't see. Do you see at least one star that would be sitting on a stone, thinking about its existence? Or maybe you see solid balls around you. Running bunny ball, running mice. In short, these are full Smeshuriki, St. Petersburg, by the way. Here they are not. Smeshuriki is only in the cartoon about Smeshuriki. Therefore, the world is incomparable. And this is the principle that we will use, large-scale non-invariance of the universe. Its essence lies in the fact that at different scales, Slices have their own specific forces, principles of symmetry, and laws of interaction, including the laws of interaction between people, the laws of interaction between people and the higher world. And on each large-scale slice, these laws are different. Part 2. Without similarity in the social divine world. So, we have the instincts of any justice and competition. How do they work, and how can they be distributed across a large-scale hierarchical structure? Let's start with the fact that the social and non-social world is, in principle, equally arranged hierarchically. For those who understand that hierarchy exists, there is humanity as a whole, there is civilization, there are states, peoples, nationalities, tribes, communities, families. In other words, it is such a hierarchical pyramid. There is a hierarchy in the army, let's say the commander of the fronts, marshals, generals, colonels, and so on. There is a hierarchy in production, the director of the plant, the heads of workshops, the hierarchy even in kindergarten. The head of kindergarten is there. Hierarchy in the school, there is a school principal for the head, so to speak, teachers. Hierarchy is everywhere, believe me. Nowhere, except in chaos, there is no hierarchy. Only in anarchy, which is the mother of the new order, there is no hierarchy. But that is why it is anarchy, that it translates from one hierarchy to another. Therefore, anarchy is. But there is also an absolutely exact hierarchy in the divine world. There is God as the highest substance, spirits, helpers or angels as you like, the souls of people, simple monads. Well, these hierarchical structures, if you open the internet, will pour out on you just thousands, if they are millions, of different variants of hierarchy in the subtle world. For us, it is not important that everything is arranged there, but it is important that there is still a hierarchy there. In other words, there are some different levels, and we will see how these different levels interact with each other. So, at one time, as they say, I wrote a book called The Matrix of Social Development. Here it is presented here. In this book, I have just explored these incomparable social and spiritual levels. In this book, I managed to show clearly that at each level of the hierarchy, there are their own laws. There are their own principles that operate, well, in different ways. And therefore, if we have established on the same level that the law of love operates there, then we can calmly, so to speak, rest with this law of love when we go to the front and fight. Because there it is necessary to use a completely different law, the law of hatred. If we go to the workshop and so on, there is also practically no need for the law of love, because we work there. What kind of love can there be between, let's say, you and the master? Well, if, of course, the master is an ugly woman, then something else may arise. And so, in principle, no love. The use of laws of one level at other levels leads to errors and gigantic problems. And I must say that this is a total misfortune of all mankind, a total misfortune of consciousness. That is, here are seemingly simple things, smash everything on the shelves, right? You have a lot of stuff in your room. Put the shoes down, let's say there. Underwear is a little higher on the shelf. Let's say there is something even higher, shirts, hats up. And everything will be fine. You'll know where to get what from. And it wouldn't occur to you, let's say, to put a hat on your legs there, panties, so to speak, on your body, on your hands. You will take what you need from the shelf and use it for what you need. But in the social world, people have completely mixed everything up, absolutely. Why? Because this hierarchical representation, I repeat again, I boast, it is absent in the minds of people. It's almost gone. That is, the rarest people meet, mostly my subscribers. There are only 13,000 of them who know what it is. But in Russia, outside of Russia, I don't have subscribers yet. So, my subscribers know that the world is arranged hierarchically. And this hierarchy has its own levels, and each has its own laws. So there's nothing, I say again, trying to put slippers on your head, figuratively speaking, will not lead to anything good. Here. So, a system matrix for the social world. Let me remind you that this is the matrix we came to in previous lectures. The meaning of this matrix is that in the family, this is the cell, the society is small, love works. If we go higher up the scale hierarchy, there is a labor collective, for example, a factory, there is no longer love. It acts very weakly. There is justice at work there. If we rise even higher and reach the level of, let's say, a country or a city there, then you cannot look for justice there. Especially if you enter the market with your product, then forget about what justice is there. Because there are laws of competition. Whoever offers the best product at a lower price wins. There is no other justice there. And finally, there is the highest expediency, which we talked about last time, and we will recall it all again. Why did I give you this scheme with the previous lecture? To remind you that it's all very simple in the social world, but the same thing works divinely in the world. Let's start with the zero level. In the social world, at the world level, an individual lives, and his instincts are very important for him. What is instinct? Survival instinct. The instinct I have to eat, drink, breathe, warm. That is, it is self-sufficient. Self-sufficiency. And what, let's say, is an instinct for the human soul? Because we are already moving now to the spiritual world. Well, the soul, it is also looking for new information, striving for truth, knowledge of the world, for development. This is characteristic, first of all, of researchers, but I must say that women as well. Because women are very fond of new information. They gather, start gossiping with each other about who has what, how much, where and how. Why? Because the soul, it turns out, it feeds on new information. For her, information is the same food as a plate of soup for you and me. And if this information is not available, the soul begins to starve, and then begins to rebel. And such experiments were conducted in quotation marks, when people were put in solitary cells, where they spent a long time, and went crazy, and died. Although they were fed, it seems, no one mocked them, no experiments were put on, but there was not enough information. There was no information. In the absence of information, they died. This is a very vivid example. By the way, this is Nikolai Morozov, our scientist, who created the theory that Fomenko later picked up. I'm not going to comment on the quality of this theory and its properties, but the fact is that Nikolai Morozov was a revolutionary and got into a fortress, so, in my opinion, he sat in Petropavlovsk. Yes, in my opinion, he sat in Petropavlovsk. I don't remember how many years, but I think it's more than 20, in solitary. When I was on a tour, I was just horrified. That is, here a door opens, such, yes, a lattice, for example, and you get into such a hole with a small window. And in this hole it was necessary to sit for more than 20 years, to live. Everyone who got into the same neighboring cells with him, all went crazy or died. He was the only one left alive. Why? He instinctively, Morozov, he allowed them to read only one book there, the Bible. He has been reading this Bible for all these 20-something years, but if he had just read it, how quickly he would have exhausted the possibilities of this book. He began to build his new model of human history around this book. And when he was finally released by the revolution, they made him such a revolutionary, a victim of the regime. In the park, he was given a whole estate. He was even made a landowner. I was in the house of his museum, a two-story house, very pleasant. For that time, it was an incredible wealth, yes. That is, he was rewarded for his long torment, but that's not what I'm talking about. When he was asked, and how did you manage to find out how difficult it was to sit in solitary confinement in general? He gave an answer that I think everyone should remember. He said, and I wasn't sitting in a cell, I was sitting in the universe. You understand, right? That's why he was saved, because mentally, figuratively, spiritually, he was in the universe with all this world. That he had accumulated information, and he created new ideas, and this saved him. Thus, the soul must be nourished. It must feed on new information. It must feed on new emotions, new feelings. If she does not experience these new feelings, does not receive information, she starves, shrivels, and dies of hunger, which has been repeatedly proven in experiments. Well, there is also, as with any instinct, in addition to nutrition, you need to run around yourself from external danger. A person protects himself from external danger. From what? Well, in the forest from wolves, for example, in the city from bandits, from some crazy drivers. Half-drunk drug addicts who rush through the streets, for example, right? But we are always trying to save ourselves from something and protect ourselves. Similarly, the soul? The soul protects itself from bad influences. Some are so afraid of this world that they hide from it in some cell and begin to live there. Why? Because there is no bad influence in Kelly at all. Just you and God. Well, up to the Buddhists, who may not be hiding in a cell, but they perceive the world very distantly, considering this world to be some kind of mine, some kind of illusion. And therefore, it is not worth taking this world seriously, he believes a Buddhist. Still treat some such chimeras. That is, therefore, a Buddhist, a real Buddhist, this follower of the Buddha, a Buddha said that there is no world of gods. There is no world of the universe, there is nothing. There is only your consciousness, stupid, which does not understand that it does not exist. And what is there? You ask, he says, there is only nirvana. Well, you see, if you think about nirvana, you will be saved. Well, there is another option. That is, let's say you don't want to get new information, but your soul strives for communication. And this communication with people is absolutely not enough for you. You don't get satisfaction from this communication. Then you start looking for communication with whom? Well, for example, with God. You go to the cell, pray, communicate with God. I believe that this is also the way for many people. Then you become a chemist, completely lock yourself away from people. And your communication is then established with the higher world. In other words, you do not communicate with your body. You do not listen to your instincts. You do not communicate with people around you. You are vertically straight there, communication. Any option that suits you, it is acceptable here because this is your way, and no one will tell you which way you need to clean up, except yourself. I'm just saying that this survival instinct is the same as for the body, for the soul. And this instinct he demands to be fulfilled. We leave this level, go up to a higher level. At the social level, in the social world, we talked about the fact that family is the unity of close people, that only love can keep a family. Indeed, without love, a family breaks up, by and large. Or she remains such a dummy, filled with absolutely nothing, no emotions, no feelings. Here, a purely formal fact. Here. And what about the spiritual world? What is a spiritual family? If there is a spiritual family there, of course. The soul longs for communication with loved ones, and where it can love selflessly and spiritually without any sexual passion, without any material passion, without any requirement to wash the floors, let's say, eat borscht and so on, and so on, and so on. And therefore, each person somehow has some kind of spiritual family, whether he is aware or not. A spiritual family is always bigger than a family. It may include a family, it may not include a family. In the spiritual family, a person includes, well, at the most primitive, let's say, simple level, some idols. Well, there are fans, female fans, who are just dying there, as they want to see their idol, some singer. Well, I don't know who he is, just Stis Mikhailov or the Beatles at one time. There I saw girls faint when the Beatles started singing. There was just an ambulance and in a stretcher took out the poor girls in bundles from their concerts. That's just the Beatles singing, they faint. Why? Because the Beatles were gods to them. And they, of course, these Beatles, or Stis Mikhailov, or some other idol, Alla Pugacheva, I don't know, anyone. They, of course, all the time they live, they mentally keep in their field, in the spiritual. They seem to communicate through the spiritual field with this person. They consider him their God, but it's still some kind of small collective for them, me and him. Let there be no physical contact, there is spiritual contact. But there are people who have a lot of such ideals and people, and maybe some images. This also includes scientists. For me as a scientist, I can say about myself, it is very important that I communicate with other scientists, with whom I am familiar from their works. Well, for example, when I consider some work of some well-known scientist, I do not know there. I have not read Aristotle. But, let's say, Copernicus or Nicholas of Cusa, for example, or Leibniz there, or Newton there. But it does not matter who is there, let's say. Or Darwin, or someone else. When I read, I feel that I am communicating with this scientist. Here he wrote something, gave it to me, and I communicate with him. And moreover, I have some thinkers and scientists closest to me, such as Chizhevsky, Tsiolkovsky, for example, Leo Tolstoy. Well, I won't list them, everyone has their own set. And this set of souls, the people with whom I communicate, is my spiritual family, which, I repeat, can also include people living at the moment. And it is ideal when your family, your close, very close people, your wife, for example, children. Daughters, granddaughters, grandchildren, parents, aunts, grandmothers, and so on, enter here. That's all, no matter where it is, nearby or not nearby. This is your spiritual family. And this spiritual family, love should reign in it. Well, you can of course put some kind of fictional image here, some kind of collected from different dreams, a cinematic image. Let's say there is an ideal of someone male. Just remember there, in my opinion, in the Dead Souls, if you could add his Ivan Nikiforovich's ears to Ivan Ivanovich's nose. This is where women sit and collect some kind of ideal for themselves. Are they doing the right thing? Of course, it's right, because here they have collected this ideal, or there a man has collected some kind of ideal of a woman. And then he starts looking for it, but if he didn't find it in this life, he will find the next one. If he does not find the next one, he will find the next one after. Then he will find it sometime. The main thing is to collect the ideal, and it will materialize someday. And if there is no ideal, then nothing will happen. It will happen that it will fall by chance under the arm. That's why.
Immediately a question.
Yes.
And can you talk to these souls and get some kind of answer?
Well, of course. But this is not a conversation like this, like at the table, when spinning. That's what I don't suffer from at all. Here I am. How does my conversation usually go? I suppose some thought, I think a thought, as they say, do not interfere. I think a thought, yes, for example, at this moment. Naturally, the thought begins to collide with the thoughts of other people who once read. I begin to compare my thought with the thought of some scientist, I think, but that's what he said. Or, let's say, but my business partner would not approve of what I'm thinking right now. That is, I somehow still relate my thoughts to what I heard. That is, every person, if he lives correctly, creates some kind of living images of other people, no matter who are currently living, or not living, who live in his brain and in his mind. And when these images live, they live their own lives. And you can communicate with them, but you don't have to turn the table around, you don't have to take drugs there or something else. Simple enough.
Receive and get an answer?
Well, in principle, I try to find the answers myself. I don't know where they come from, of course. There must be some source of answers there. But sometimes I get answers, well, I don't know. It's very much such a picture. I am a supporter of, this kind of spontaneous communication, which I call collective intelligence. When, let's say, people gather in one room and begin to communicate, and the chatter begins about nothing at first. About an hour later, when everything warms up and everyone is already on the same level, that is, the mood arises. It can't be done in less than 40 minutes. In other words, you first need to talk, then after 40 minutes, once, there is some kind of quantum transition. And suddenly, people begin to think coherently, collectively, and this strengthens your own consciousness and other people tens, hundreds of times, and you make discoveries that no one alone would ever have made. But to do this, you need to tune into these people. So if you have some images, there are some ideals. Well, for example, my granddaughters have such an ideal, and they are guided by it all the time. And thank God. I won't say who. But it's good, because they, in fact, consult with this ideal every time. And you don't have to call, No need to write letters, no need to knock on the table there, make some passes there, watch some glass ball, breathe some, so to speak, these. That is, for a normal person, this is all completely unnecessary, I think. Then all these exits to the other world for some purpose there. Well, of course, these are experiments, I would say so, these are experiments. I don't know how to relate to this. I, for example, have never treated this well, personally. In other words, this is a completely unnecessary procedure for me. We are already communicating. Here we communicate, and communicate. And moreover, let's say, I also communicate with you one way or another. Right now I'm saying something. You understand perfectly well that I, let's say, would not have told another presenter. Why? What do you think? Because I've already tuned into you. I tuned into your perception of the world, to your model of the world. And I am guided by it, and try to somehow be in a coherent state with you, in a resonant state with you. Do you understand? Therefore, Here I want to compliment the person who is currently absent, with whom I also sometimes communicate. This is Vadim Disiadov. At one time, I had a channel that had 37 subscribers, and despite the fact that I said the same thing that I'm saying now, but there were very few subscribers. Well, it's just that I didn't know how to promote my own ideas. Then Vadim Disiadov came out to me, it was the Dawn channel, now, unfortunately, it no longer works, and said that he had looked through my recordings very carefully and really wanted to record 10 of my performances on his channel. I say, why 10? He says, well, I have chosen 10 topics. He sent me a list of these topics. To be honest, I was stunned. I was stunned by how relevant everything is, how everything is to the point, how compressed and compact everything is. And when we met for the first time in Dobrolyubov's library, it was about 2 years ago, in the summer. So he pointed the camera at me, said very pleasant, flattering words for me, undeserved of course, but this, you know, always somehow lubricates and facilitates the beginning of a conversation. That's when he told me all this, I started talking. I was talking about something I've known for a long time. Do you understand? I have already written about it 100 times. I have spoken on these topics many times, but when I saw his eyes, here is the camera. Here are his eyes, his interest, I saw his genuine interest. I'm so to speak, fired up. I'm in such a resonance. Entered, yes. That this lecture she caused some kind of gibberish there, because she immediately ran up about 350,000 views. That is, if earlier for me 100 views was not an achievable bar. There are literally 350 views in just a few weeks, now 400,000 views already. Why? Yes, because people felt this resonance, this live communication, a genuine story, interest. This is the collective resonance that I have been talking about all the time lately. If there is one, it is amplified tenfold. I could now tell you everything that I have already written on my slides there like this. Spiritual family, spiritual love, soul, greed, communication with close people who, in half an hour, the lecture would have ended. Here, but to be honest, it's not that boring to me, it's even disgusting. I don't like them. Well, yes, I want live communication. It is in this live communication that sometimes such thoughts appear, which you will not achieve in another communication. Therefore, I can tell you one thing, to everyone who hears me, that each of you has your own spiritual family. You will deal with her, with this spiritual family. Who do you love, who don't you love? Maybe you are jealous of someone, maybe you are offended by someone. If you bring harmony to this spiritual family of yours, then it will be easier for you among the people who surround you alive. Who are not part of your spiritual family? Well, there's a janitor, let's say there's a concierge, I don't know, a neighbor at work, for example. There is a trolleybus driver. All of this is absolutely not included in any of your spiritual family, of course, yes. But when you have harmony in the spiritual family, you will have harmony in everything else. But then, of course, strictly speaking, you also love and take care of your soul, because your soul is starving without emotions, without feelings, without different emotions, by the way, and different feelings, by the way. That is, remember the movie, so to speak, The White Son of the Desert. Remember, he ate black caviar, right? And again you gave me this black one, well, yes. And do you understand? That's what people think. People don't understand. They think it's, such a beautiful image of exaggeration. In fact, it can't be that way. I answer you that this is not what happens. I do not know how he endured this life with caviar at all. I'll explain why. I grew up on the Volga River. My father was the commandant of the river port. They had their own ship, on which they sailed from Volgograd, Stalingrad back then, up to the Caspian Sea, and there were landing stages, on which he was the military commander, that is, they were carrying military cargo along the Volga, including. And there should be a certain system for accepting these cargoes, controlling the passage ships, and they carried out inspections. Inspections have always been a very fun event. All the families gathered. We boarded this beautiful, so to speak, two-deck ship. This is certainly not Abramovich's yacht, but in our times even it was a big ship. We sailed somewhere there in some kind of glass. For example, there is a place in Volgograd, so we landed on this glass. Then it means we went down, swam in some baklashka, some Volga, walked, picked something there, berries or mushrooms. So, well, and then at the end of this journey, my father went to the head of the landing stage, and he took out to him a piece of sturgeon wrapped in some kind of parchment paper, and a 3-liter jar of caviar. As I remember now, it cost 3 rubles. Moreover, this game was not a handmade one, it's this plasticine, so to speak, which everyone is eating now, yes. We disdained to eat it. It was caviar cooked at night, before we received it. That is, you asked for it. It was weekly forced into a bucket there. Then poured into a jar, and this is salted, lightly salted grainy caviar at night, in this 3-liter jar. It made a journey then, our refrigerator. Well, every time after such a trip, absolutely the same story happened. So, in the morning we get up, the first morning, this jar is put, caviar is piled up, butter is here, white bread. White bread is spread with this white butter, a thick layer of caviar on top, the first sandwich, the second sandwich. But the third one is already simple, well, how not to eat just. Well, you choke, well, you eat, everything is fine. The next day, well, eat a maximum of 2 sandwiches. On the third day, I couldn't eat more than 1 sandwich, I swear.
And they smeared caviar 2 or 3 times as thick as a finger.
No, well, it's impossible anymore, it's starting to fall apart. It's not the caviar, which is like a soul that has spread, black. I do not know, now such a bank number would cost several million rubles. In short, when we smeared, so to speak, after a week. Yes, it always ended with the same story, always. How many of these cans do I remember? Somewhere in a week, maybe 2 at most, there was a lonely, completely sad jar of caviar in the refrigerator, covered with mold. Somewhere at best eaten by 2/3. That is, a third of the jar was always thrown away. Why? She gets bored very quickly. And the fact that you can't eat it alone, you can't eat it at all for a long time, black caviar. It's not bread. Bread can be eaten all the time. Tea can be drunk in buckets. That is what I'm talking about. I've gone very far away from our topic there, but
they're nice.
Well, of course. And now when I go to the fish shop, they say to me, "We have a fresh ozarinka, don't you want it?" I say, "I can't see your sturgeon, I've had enough of it for life. But I'm really full." Moreover, I will not say anything bad about sturgeon now, at the moment. I will not spoil business, maybe to someone. Well, in short, this is not the one. In short, that's what I'm getting at.
It is now the second freshness.
It's not even about freshness. Well, I'll tell you anyway. The fact is that when I went to Volgograd, since I was connected in one way or another with this river process, my father served in the military there. We had acquaintances, including divers, and these divers. When they went down to the bottom of the Volga River, well, you never know what they had to find some kind of sunken ship or something there. They told me already in those days, but the truth is that in those days, the industry worked there, I'm telling you. Another river of mud flowed under the Volga River. Yes, it's quite wide and deep. A sturgeon, he's a pig, he has these antennae, so to speak, he digs at the bottom all the time. This is not, so to speak, a fish that swims in the water column, but all the time at the bottom. And so they are here. This stuff that flowed under the Volga River, they, of course, they were decently poisoned by this stuff. Therefore, the last time I remember, when I ate sturgeon, I ate in Volsky, when I took my ear out of Katrina's head. I had a terrible allergy, my whole body was covered with red spots. Why? Because, well, sturgeon is dirty. Sturgeon in the Caspian Sea, I think it's clean. After all, the Caspian Sea is big, try to get it dirty there, right? A sturgeon caught somewhere in Astrakhan is also, I think, clean. Somewhere in Iran, sturgeon can be clean. Sturgeon grown in some special pools, backlags, is also, I think, clean. Why? Because there is no dirt there. But what do they feed him? I don't know. Yes. I don't know. Well, what am I talking about? To the fact that the soul needs, so to speak, in addition to caviar, so to speak, and bread. And both, that is, a variety is needed. Therefore, even if you experience some positive emotions, it will be like eating only sweets. After a while,
Через некоторое
you will be
время у вас
allergic to these
аллергия на эти
positive
стиль эмоций
emotions,
наступит,
and you
и
will already
вы
feel
будете
terrible.
чувствовать себя
Allergies will come,
ужасно,
and so
аллергия
on.
наступит.
In other words, the
Душа
soul
вот
needs
весь
the whole
спектр
spectrum of
эмоций,
emotions,
от
from
любви
love
до
to hate,
ненависти, от
from anger to
гнева до
the whole
весь
spectrum, you
спектр,
know.
понимаете? То
In
есть
other words,
чем
this is what makes
богаче.
this spectrum richer.
Это, кстати,
By the
хорошо
way,
было в свое
it was
время
good at one time, understood in
понимали
Russian
в русской
culture.
культуре. Вы
Let's say you
послушайте русские
listened to
песни
some
какие-то
songs,
там,
romances, there were
романсы,
funny songs,
были
marches,
веселые
let's say they
песни,
were cheerful.
марши,
There were very sad, there
бодрые,
were even
были
dreary
очень
ones.
грустные, были даже тоскливые.
Well, for
Например,
example, whether I die, but over
«Горю
the
я,
grave.
но над
My favorite song,
могилою». Моя
right?
любимая песня, да?
Burn and I,
«Гори,
and my
сияй,
star.
звезда». Или
Or
«Есенин»,
Yesenin with
«Сила
his
грусти».
Russian sadness,
Русский,
right?
да? Я,
Of
конечно, не
course,
Соколов,
I'm
чтобы
not a
петь такие
stock to
песни,
sing
но
such songs,
всё равно
but yes,
да, вот
when you sit
когда
next to a
сидишь
real bard
рядом с
there who can
настоящим
sing,
там бардом,
he will
который
definitely
умеет
sing a
петь, он
cheerful
обязательно споет и
song, and
веселую
such,
песню, и
and
такую,
sad, and
и
some kind of even
грустную,
sad there,
и
and
какую-то
rollicking.
там даже тоскливую там, и разухабистую.
This
Вот,
is
вот
the
этот вот
spectrum of
спектр
broad
широкий
emotions we get.
эмоций мы
Or
получаем.
take,
Или
let's
взять, допустим,
say,
классическую
classical
музыку, когда
music
мы
when we
идем
go to a
на
concert.
концерт.
But
Ну,
imagine that
представьте, что
only
там одни
marches will
марши
be
идут.
played there. I once went to a
Я как
concert
сходил
of the
на
Vienna
концерт
Opera, so to
Венской оперы,
speak,
так сказать,
this is not an opera there. Well, the Vienna Symphony
Венский оркестр
Orchestra.
симфонический,
A
прекрасный
wonderful
оркестр,
orchestra, gorgeous.
шикарный. Он
He
приезжает раз в
comes
год к нам
once
в
a year
Россию
directly to
перед Новым
Russia
годом.
before the new year. Here, well,
Вот.
what
Ну,
can I
что я могу
say?
сказать?
It's just that it's
Это
not an
просто
orchestra,
вот
but
не
some kind of
оркестр, а
car.
машина какая-то.
That
То есть
is, the
игра
game is
идеальная,
perfect, flawless,
безупречная,
no
ни
hitch,
фишка не
no
задвинута.
hitch. But
Но
somehow
что-то
I
как-то
got
мне
bored
скучно.
somehow. It's boring because there's a
Скучно,
good
потому
enough
что
music,
бравурная достаточно
mostly
музыка,
Strauss,
там
in my
Страусс,
opinion,
по-моему,
was
исполнялся.
performed there, and
И
some such
какие-то
funny
такие
things.
веселые вещи.
But
Ну
you
и
can
тоже
listen to
послушать
them
можно,
a little
всё
bit,
послушать.
and then already.
Или вдруг
Or
мне подарил там
suddenly I
диск
was
с
presented with a
армянским, так
CD
сказать,
with an Armenian
каким-то
folk
народным,
musician, well known in
очень
Armenia,
известным там
who
в
are on a
Армении,
pipe there.
так
They have
сказать,
an
музыкантом,
Armenian
который на
pipe
дудочке
on which they
вот
perform
выступает
Armenian folk,
армянскую,
such very
которые
sad,
исполняют они
dreary
вот
melodies.
армянские народные, такие очень грустные, тоскливые
There, you
мелодии.
know,
Там,
such
знаете,
a
такая тоска.
melancholy. And
И вот
so
я
I
всегда
always
ставлю
put on
диск,
a
я ставлю
CD,
где-то раз в
and I
год.
put it
Мне
somewhere once a
хватает вполне,
year.
чтобы тоски
I have
набраться,
enough
да,
to get bored
вот
with
это
the
армянское
Armenian world.
всемирное.
And I
И
listen to
слушаю
the
где-то
first three
первые три
melodies
мелодии,
somewhere. I
мне очень
like it,
нравится.
because I want
Потому
something
что хочется,
spicy,
знаете,
salty,
остренького,
yes.
солененького,
I
да.
listen to
Я
this
слушаю
mournful
вот это вот
singing,
заунывное
and then that's it.
пение, а
I
потом
can't
всё,
take
я
it
не могу больше,
anymore, I'm
обиделся,
full,
я
give
ставлю
me.
сразу какой-нибудь
I
веселый
immediately
джаз,
put on some
буду
kind of
следом,
cheerful jazz right
или,
there,
допустим,
or, let's say,
Рахманинова,
there
там,
is Rachmaninoff
исполнение
performed by
какого-нибудь
some
оркестра
wonderful
замечательного.
orchestra, in which there is
Вот, в
gaiety,
котором
there is no.
веселости нет
There is in
никакой,
general
есть
such a
только
sea
такое
of sadness
море
there, for example, longing
грусти,
even
там, например,
sometimes.
тоски
I
даже
mean,
иногда.
that's what
То есть
I'm
вот я к
saying,
чему это говорю?
because to
Потому что
us,
нам,
here I would come
я
back about
вернул
this
к
soul.
этой душе.
The
Душе
soul
нужно
needs
всё.
everything, you know. She needs
Ей нужна и
information,
информация, и
communication with
общение с
God,
Богом,
and
и
emotions.
эмоции.
If you give it
И
to
если
her,
вы это
she
ей
has fun,
даете, она
she lives,
веселится,
she
она
rejoices.
живет, она
And
радуется.
if
Если
you
вы чем-то
limit it in some
ограничиваете
way,
ее, да?
yes. Well,
Ну,
here is a
современная
modern
эстрада, я не
stage.
знаю, есть
I
там
do not
что-то
know, is there something sad, philosophical
грустное
there?
такое, философское?
There's
Ничего,
probably nothing.
наверное.
Maybe that's
Может,
why I
поэтому
like
мне нравится
Rammstein.
Рамштайн.
Rammstein is
Rammstein
such a rough, you know,
это
this
такая
kind of military men's music.
грубая такая, знаете, вот такая военная мужская музыка.
Why?
Почему?
Because it
Потому что она
contrasts with our
контрастирует
syrupy
с
one
нашим
here,
этим вот,
our syrupy stage,
нашей
where,
сложной
so to
эстрадой.
speak, there are silicone
Девочки,
girls
да.
singing silicone songs.
Силиконовые девочки поют силиконовые песни.
Well, in short,
Ну вот, короче
I
говоря,
have
я
gone
совсем
very
далеко
far,
ушел, но я вернулся
but I
вот
have
к душе,
returned to the
чтобы было
soul,
понятно,
so
что
that it is
душа,
clear
она
that the soul
нуждается в
needs nourishment.
питании.
We are
Мы
creating a
создаем
spiritual
духовную
family,
семью,
and we must be able to do
и это
this
надо уметь
and
делать,
strive
надо
for
к
it.
этому
And
стремиться.
we finally
И
rise
мы,
to the
наконец,
third level,
поднимаемся
which
на
is also the
третий
second in a
уровень,
row.
уже второй по
And this,
счету.
by the way, is how
А
the
вот,
spiritual
кстати,
family
так
is represented.
представляют
Let's say,
духовную семью,
look at the
допустим,
slide on the
в
internet.
интернете на
Here's
слайде
something like that,
смотрите,
right?
что-то в этом духе.
You can see the picture. And we are going up to
И
the
мы
next level,
поднимаемся на
the
следующий
second
уровень,
one.
второй.
Work
Работа,
sex
секс,
justice.
справедливость. Помните, мы
Remember, we
рассказывали
told you
о
that
том,
in the
что в
workshop,
стиху
it doesn't matter if you love your children or
любишь ты своих
grandchildren,
детей
or
или
it doesn't
внуков,
matter.
или неважно.
It's
Важно,
important that
что
you
ты
do a certain
делаешь
job
определенную
accurately,
работу точно.
and how many
Сколько ты
details
деталей
you have
сделал, столько ты
made,
и
so
получишь.
much you will get. If
Если
you
ты
made
сделал 100
100
деталей, у
parts, parts. Let's say you have 5 children there, and another made 100 parts. He has 1 child. The salary will still be the same. Identical. That is, no one is interested in whether you love your wife, you love your children. It's the same in the workshop, and, I must say, there is exactly the same thing in the spiritual world. And this is all described in the New Testament. There are a lot of very sensible parables that are not always interpreted correctly, from my point of view. There are such parables there. The parable of the workers in the vineyard. The kingdom of heaven is a vineyard, a grape, or a god. Let me remind you of this parable, who has forgotten it. Behold, either the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of the house, who went out early in the morning to hire a worker for his vineyard. The Gospel of Matthew 20 fraction 1. Then it means that there is a story described there. He hired workers and gave each of them, let's say, a denarius, although they worked at different times. And those people who came last, they were terribly outraged. They said, "How is it? We worked 8 hours, you give us a denarius. And we know that you gave a denarius to some person who worked for only 2 hours. Where is justice?" These workers were shouting. To which the husbandman, that is, God, answered them, "Am I not in my power to do what I want? Or is your eye depending on the fact that I am kind? Didn't I tell you, he promised a denarius? Promised. Did you get it? Got it? Did I promise you for a full-time job? Yes. What's the problem? The problem is, I want what I want. The grape God told him, then I turn it around. So it will be, and then he said, so they will be the last first, and the first last, for there are many invited, but few chosen ones. That is, God, he himself knows who to give what to. What's the point? Here God gives each talent. He gave a lot to one, gave a little to the other. Where is justice? We said that there is no justice in the social world, remember. It is necessary to strive for it, but you will never get perfect justice anyway. It is impossible to weigh on any scales the contribution of each person to the social world. It is impossible, there are no such scales. Therefore, it is necessary to strive, but there is no absolute justice. And here you know from the opposite, in this wonderful, ingenious parable, so to speak, it is shown that not only is there no justice in what I give you, a denarius, but I purposely violate your primitive justice, linear justice. For what? So that you understand that I am the master of the world, and I give myself, and I know why they give, to whom and how much. Justice in the world of reincarnation. This is also a very important topic here. The fact is that everyone knows what reincarnation is. Although I am Orthodox, I believe in reincarnation, just as the first 500 years did not believe in orthodoxy, or rather, in Christianity. Now, I believe that each incarnation is a certain task, including teaching some skills, acquiring some properties. And some incarnations are working out the mistakes of the past. That is, you messed up, you are sent to correctional labor. Well, that's fine. It's the same in the social world, but there is an incarnation as a vacation, a reward for previous labors. Well, for example, he performed some feats there all his life in a previous life, he received nothing for it, except, so to speak, a tragic death, let's say, right? You incarnate, and they say to you, well, brother, rest now. And you get good from life all your life, especially without trying hard. If we perceive it only as in one life, then what kind of justice is there? One plows, gets nothing, the other gets nothing by doing nothing. We don't know the previous incarnations, we don't know anything. Therefore, it is necessary to accept divine justice as an integral of the sum of all births and the goals of these births. Here is the formula. For scientists, it is clear what is the integral of the sum of all births and the goals of these births. And most importantly, as it is said in the New Testament, and do not judge anyone. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Why? As soon as we begin to judge, we again fall into what trap? The trap of pride. It seems to us that we know how right, how fair, and we begin to condemn what can be corrected, of course. Does not mean that we need to accept the world as it is. It needs to be constantly improved, corrected, and so on. But we need to improve and correct, and not blame this world for some kind of there is absolute injustice. Why? Because we don't know what justice is, smeared across thousands of incarnations. We don't know what the Creator's plan was, who sent us into this world. And finally, the third level is natural selection. The fact is that we recall the previous lecture with you, there is already no justice on the market there. And in principle it cannot be there. Why? Because what kind of justice can there be? Let's say there are two women standing here selling the same tomatoes. One grew these tomatoes, spent 20 days there, and the other somehow grew them in one day. And the prices are the same. Where is justice? There is no justice. And there can be no justice in the market. In the market, it doesn't matter how much work you put into this product. There is only one value, what quality of the product, and how much it costs. And that's it. That's it. In other words, forget about justice here in the market. Forget about love in the market. Forget about your instincts. There is only one rule that applies, the rules of natural selection in the market. Well, life does not consist of one market, of course, we understand this here. And then, what is a good market? It destroys the monopoly. Monopoly is when everything is the same, when control is complete. And if competition is the natural selection of the divine in the world. All religions and all esoteric teachings speak about choosing the best souls. The most successful and productive move up, while the idlers stay at the bottom or go even lower. It couldn't have been any other way. If God could create all souls perfect at once, then he wouldn't need all these stories, this screening, natural selection. I have often wondered why this natural selection is needed at all, if God is almighty. If he is omnipotent, he immediately creates ideal people, puts them in an ideal society, gives them the perfect technology, and they live in an ideal world. But it's not like there are two options, either there is no God, or God, as if he can't immediately create, or does not want to immediately create an ideal world. But since we came at the very beginning to such a deep conviction that we accept the model with the God of this world, there is a God, but what is there? God creates souls, tests them with his work, with his life. The most successful samples are selected for the subsequent revolution. The unfit ones are rejected and sent to eternal darkness. There are parables that confirm this from the New Testament. The parable of the fig tree that Christ dried up. I'm just going to read out a few reasons. In the morning, already returning to the city, Christ got up and saw a fig tree on the way, went up to it and, finding nothing on it but only leaves, said to her, "Let there be no fruit from you forever." And the fig tree withered immediately. That is, if you do not bear fruit in this world, then you are not needed, and you wither. Praekasti, here came the sower of the sow. When he sowed, other grain fell, roads flew, birds pecked at this, another fell on stony places where there was little land. And soon it did not rise, because the ground was shallow. But when the sun went down, it withered, and because it had no root, it withered. Some fell among thorns, and thorns grew, and choked it. Some fell on good ground, and brought forth fruit. One is east, and the other is 60, sometimes 30. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. So, this is God. Why does he sow his seeds on the stone? Why does he sow them in thorns? A parable about talents, but I also used it last time. I won't read it all. Those who know, those who do not know, honor. The meaning of this parable is that this is how he would have distributed a denarius or a talent, and according to talent. He went to the vineyard, and then returned. And so one worker turned this talent into 10 talents, that is, he wrapped it up there, invested it somewhere, another, into 2, and the third, as he was given talent, so he buried it in the ground. When the owner returned, he returned this talent and said, "Here I am returning this talent to you, because I am afraid of you. Here's yours for you." And then the Lord, the same God, answered and said to him, "You are a crafty slave and lazy. You should have given my silver to the merchant. I would get mine with a profit. So take a talent from him and give him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has it will be given and multiplied, but to the incompetent, what he has will also be taken away. And throw the worthless slave into the outer darkness. There will be a cloak and gnashing of teeth." Well, where is justice here? Where is the love of Christ for these slaves? Where? He just chose the most talented and gave him everything. Because not only is he talented, he also multiplies these talents. Read the New Testament carefully. There are answers to all questions. And here's another interesting thought. Just recently, Pope Francis literally said the following. This is a quote. When we read about the creation of the world in Genesis, we risk imagining God as a magician with a magic wand, who is able to do everything. But that's not the case, Francis said. He created all living things and allowed them to develop in accordance with the internal laws that he gave to everyone. Francis further stated, thus, this work on the creation of the world continued for many centuries and millennia, until it became what we know today. Since God is not a demiurge or a magician, but a creator who gives life to all things. The beginning of the world was not a product of chaos, having some other origin. It proceeded directly from the supreme principle that creates with love. Well, you know, when I read this quote, this is the last pope, in my opinion, French, I was glad for the Church. Why? Because the Church has finally accepted the fact of evolution. Why? Well, the Catholic Church accepted it. Our Orthodox Church, in my opinion, has not yet taken this step. Why? Because it is simply impossible to deny further, in the future, all the facts of evolutionary development, and to assume that God touched with a magic wand and created this world right away, but it could have been thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, because people did not have any facts about the history of the origin of life. But now this is a completely unthinkable thing, and it was necessary to do something about it. And finally, the highest rank of the Catholic Church recognized evolution. Not even a few thousand years have passed. Well, at least in my opinion, Triard de Chardin was the first to do this in the last century. He was a high-ranking priest. Here, then there, back in the middle of the last century, another pope also recognized evolution, but here Francis put the last point. What does this mean? If so, then God is in the picture. Now the clergy of the Catholic Church are the creator, and like every creator, he is a breeder. That is, he sows souls, chooses the best, collects them, gives them the best conditions, looks again, chooses again, sows again, chooses again. What is the conclusion for you and me? Don't relax, guys. Do not start on any laurels, because at the next stage, you may not be selected at the top, but thrown into eternal darkness. Why? Because the selection process, as you know, goes on continuously, does not stop. And then, when we are quite ripe, they will probably sow us some kingdom of heaven. So, we've been through almost everything: instincts, love, justice, natural selection. The last final part remains. The fourth level is the highest expediency. In our last section, we considered the example of the Titanic, and the Church, and the city of Coventry. I will remind you briefly, I will not remind you in such detail, that for some reason, women and children were rescued on the Titanic. But men were not rescued. And there is no justice in this, of course, because it's people, and there are people here, and it's completely unclear what the men were guilty of. But somehow they weren't put in the boat there. Well, another story is Churchill and the City of Commons. Why? Because he knew that the fascists would bomb the Commons, but he realized that if he warned the townspeople and they hid, the Germans would realize that their encryption system had been solved, and then England would lose a huge number of troops. And it was even possible to lose the war. Therefore, Churchill made a forced sacrifice by the civilians of the city of Coventry. There was no justice, no love, and no natural selection in this. It was the ultimate expediency. Here, and now let's get back to our topic. Let's look at what is happening without our influence on the earth. Natural catastrophes occur. Is there some kind of justice? No. In the garden and Gomorrah were destroyed by the supreme dream, God. There were. The world flood, well, let it be not a world flood, but there was some kind of flood, there was. That is, a natural disaster occurs and washes away almost everyone. And there is no explanation for this, so to speak. There is no love there for the people who died during these floods, tsunamis, earthquakes. There is no justice there, because people there can be kind, good, evil, lazy, they all die together. There is no natural selection there, because everyone dies. But it's happening. Moreover, there is still a coming apocalypse in the New Testament, when the lion's share of humanity will perish.
львиная доля человечества
What's the
погибнет.
secret
В чем
here?
здесь секрет?
The secret
Секрет
lies in the
заключается в том,
fact
что
that for God,
для
our life on
Бога
earth is just a temporary stay of
наша жизнь
souls
на
in some
земле
guise, so to speak.
это всего лишь навсего некоторое, так сказать, временное пребывание душ в каком-то обличии.
And then there
Вот
comes a
приходит
time,
время,
as it
как бы,
were,
когда он
when he
один
alone
знает,
knows why he
зачем
is
он это
doing this,
делает.
and he seems to be
И он
saying,
как бы
not
говорит,
saying.
и
He is
говорит, и
doing what
делает то,
needs
что
to be
должен
done.
делать.
Souls leave
Души
their
покидают
bodies,
свои тела,
and then
потом
they
они
incarnate
воплощаются в
other
другие
bodies,
тела,
well, as if
ну,
they
как бы
shed their
сбрасывают
clothes.
одежды.
Why is
Зачем
this happening?
это происходит?
Well, he
Ну,
tries to
пытаются это
explain it
объяснить
with
грехами,
sins,
как Содом и
like
Гоморра,
Sodom,
да?
Gomorrah,
Или
or the
всемирный
flood,
потоп,
or the apocalypse, when sin
или
accumulates.
апокалипсис, когда грех, так сказать,
But
накапливается.
I don't know.
Я не
I
знаю.
think it's
Я
more
думаю, что
complicated here.
здесь
I
все
don't
сложнее.
presume to
Не
judge
берусь
why,
судить,
because
потому
here
что
this higher
здесь,
expediency is the
поскольку
highest
тут высшая
design,
целесообразность, это
therefore it
высший
is called
замысел,
the
поэтому
highest
называется
expediency,
высшая
because the
целесообразность. Потому что
logic of
нам,
these events is
нашему разумению,
inaccessible to us,
недоступна
to our
логика.
understanding. We must
Мы должны
accept
принять
this
это
as a
как
fact of
факт
the existence of this world,
существования этого
as a
мира,
fact of the existence of
как
higher
факт
forces,
наличия
that
высших
can do
сил, которые
something that is
могут
completely
что-то
incomprehensible
такое
to
сделать,
us
что нам совершенно
without
непонятно,
consulting,
не
without
советуясь, не
explaining.
объясняя.
So, well, the
Вот.
conclusions.
Ну и
The divine
выводы.
world is as
Божественный
hicken as
мир также
society, or
хочет
rather the opposite.
подписываться. Точнее,
That is,
наоборот.
of
То есть,
course, our
естественно, наш
social world
социальный мир–
is a
это
copy of this divine world.
копия этого
There are
божественного мира.
monad
В
souls
нем
at
есть
manas,
души,
there are
монады
spiritual
атомы, есть
families
духовные
outside of
семьи вне
time and
времени и
space, there is a
пространства,
spiritual
есть
environment of
духовная
different
среда разных душ,
souls
которые
that
участвуют в
participate in
развитии,
development,
естественном отборе на
natural selection
лучшие
for the best
характеристики и
characteristics and
параметры.
parameters.
Есть
There is
высший
a
разум,
higher
который
mind
решает
that
судьбы
decides
душ
the
и их
fate of the
воплощения,
soul,
исходя
their
из высшей
embodiment, based
целесообразности,
on
к
the
которой
highest
нам ведомо
expediency,
постичь.
which we are not given to comprehend. How to combine
Как
instincts,
соединить
love,
вместе
justice,
инстинкты, любовь,
selection,
справедливость,
naturally,
отбор,
and the highest
естественную высшую
expediency, at least in
целесообразность
your
хотя бы
head?
в своей
I
голове?
believe
Я
that
считаю,
only with
что
the help of
только с
harmony,
помощью
divine
гармонии,
harmony.
божественной
What is
гармонии.
harmony?
Что такое гармония?
Here is my
Видимо,
book, There is Quantum
никакой
Harmony.
гармонии я
I
не
can't
могу
say
сказать,
that
что
I
я
answered
ответил
all
на
the
все
questions,
вопросы, но на
but I
некоторые,
managed to
несомненно,
answer some of them there.
для
For
меня
me,
уже
there, in my opinion,
меньше
it would be
было
less
понятно.
understandable.
Ну и
Well,
вот,
finally,
наконец,
I want to
я
finish
хочу
this rather
закончить
long
вот
journey
такое
into this
достаточно
world
длинное
with my
путешествие в этот
favorite
мир
poem
моим
by
любимым
Fyodor Tuchev.
стихотворением Федора Тютчева.
Tucheva, Fedora
Тютчева
Tucheva,
Федора
is a
Тютчева,
poet of harmony
поэт
and
гармонии и
beauty,
красоты,
which sounds like
который
this.
звучит так.
There is melodiousness in the
Певучесть
sea
есть в
waves,
морских волнах,
harmony in
гармония в
spontaneous
стихийных спорах,
disputes,
и
and a
стройный
harmonious
музыкальный
musical
шум
rustle
в
flows in the
рыцарей
shaky
крепких
reeds.
душах.
An imperturbable system
Невозмутимый
in
строй во
everything,
всем,
complete harmony
созвучие
in nature.
полное в природе.
It is only in our
Лишь
illusory
наша
freedom that we
призрачность
are
одним
aware of the
развратом
discord
своим
with her.
сознаем.
Firm where, how
Откуда,
did the
как
discord
разврат
arise,
возник,
and firm, what
отчего
does
же в
the
общей
soul sing
сфере
in the
душа
general
поверила
chorus,
то, что
not
мы,
like the sea?
и
And the thinking reed
ропщем,
murmurs,
после
that is,
читателя.
we are
Мы
with
с
you.
вами.
Thank you for your
Спасибо за
attention.
внимание.
All the
Всем
best to
всего
everyone.
наилучшего.
If
Если
anyone
кто-то
wants more
хочет более
details,
подробно, все
everything
есть
is
здесь.
here. Here, well, I
Вот,
kind
ну,
of.
я тогда
Demonstrations.
демонстрации.
If you still
Если
have
какие-то
any
вопросы
questions,
остались,
I
я
am ready
готов
to answer
ответить.
them.
Yes, there is a question. So, at the beginning of your speech, it sounded that depression is a sin. Yes, I totally agree. But here's how the church interprets that stormy, strong joy is also a sin. Is this so from your point of view?
You know, as they
Знаете,
say,
как
there
говорится,
are
есть,
no poisons,
нет
there are
яда,
harmful
есть вредная
concentrations.
концентрация.
Yes,
Вот так.
here I have already
Да.
answered you
Вот я вам
practically.
ответил уже
In other
практически. То
words,
есть,
it is impossible to live a life
невозможно
of joy,
прожить жизнь
and
без
it is
радости,
impossible to live a
невозможно
life
прожить
without
жизнь
sadness,
без
without
грусти,
longing.
без тоски.
But the question is
Но
what
вопрос
concentration?
какой концентрации?
That
То есть,
is,
если она
if it is
бурная,
stormy,
переходящая все
crossing all
границы,
boundaries,
сметающая
sweeping
все
away all
барьеры
barriers,
и
and crazy
вот
joy, of
сумасшедшая
course,
радость,
it's
конечно,
probably too
наверное, это
much.
чересчур.
Although
Хотя
sometimes,
иногда,
when you
когда
watch
смотришь
especially
какие-то
sports
спортивные
competitions,
состязания,
when
когда
there is an
спортсмен
athlete
забивает
scoring a
гол,
goal,
футболист
a
какой-нибудь,
football player of some
как
kind,
он это все
how does he
отмечает.
celebrate it all? I
Здесь
think there is only
вопрос,
one
я думаю,
question
лишь в
here.
одном.
The
Вопрос
question
в
is in the
пропорциях
proportions
и
and in the
в
expression of this whole thing.
выражении вот всего этого дела.
Here. And then you know,
И
people are
потом,
different.
понимаете, люди же
I
разные.
know
Я
people
знаю
who are
людей
phlegmatic,
флегматики,
sanguine,
есть
choleric.
сангвиники, холерики.
For
Например,
example,
холерику
choleric
надо
must
взять,
necessarily
обрушить
throw
всё.
everything out. A
Сангвиник
sanguine
это сделает
person will do it
умеренно,
moderately,
флегматик
but a
вообще, ну
phlegmatic
что
person in
волю, что
general,
не
well,
волю,
what captivity?
что
That
я
I scored a goal
забил,
that
что
I
не
didn't
забил.
score. Well, that's it.
Вот так.
So that's the life she
Вот жизнь
flows.
течет.
I'm going along with
я
her.
по ней теку вместе с
You
ней.
see,
Понимаете,
but
ну
how can
как можно
universal advice
универсально
be
давать
given to all
советы всем
people
людям,
without taking into
не
account either
учитывая
one or the other or the
ни то,
third?
ни другое не требует.
Here,
Здесь,
you see,
понимаете,
here's
вот
advice to
советы
give or
давать
some
или какие-то
instructions. There is
указания
no worse.
хуже нет.
Give some
Давать
guidance.
какие-то
Yes,
ориентиры,
it is necessary.
да, надо
Why?
обязательно,
Because it
потому
is
что надо, чтобы
necessary that a
человек
person
понимал
understands this diversity.
многообразие.
It should be
Это надо
given.
давать.
Well, just so
Прямо так
hard to
жестко
order.
приказывать я
I'm
всё
an
хотел.
opponent anyway.
Я
I am a
свободолюбивый
freedom-loving
человек.
person. I can't stand when I am ordered to do something, so that's how I am to you.
Thank you very much. The knowledge that Sergei Ivanovich gave us today, I hope, will help us reach the height of heaven. And what do you think? Write in the comments. Thank you very much again, and see you again.